Beginning on Daf Mesechtes Nazir Daf Nun. Begin 10 lines down at the top of the Amud, where the Gemara continues to explain the halacha of our previous Mishnah. We were discussing, continuing from the previous parak, regarding the three different prohibitions that apply to the Nazir. One of them is regarding Tumas Mes, and the previous Mishnah was discussing what type of Tumas Mes is a Nazir Megalech. Does he have to cut off his hair, start over his Naziras from the beginning? And the Gemara continues describing the halachic parameters of these tumas hames. Ashir Kos about Bekazach and Cheskel turn to Daf Chaim. In today's daf. So we're discussing today's daf about the description of netzel, which is one of the items mentioned in the Mishnah. What exactly is that? Which netzel is only mitami through keresh v'hertiach, regarding if it congeals and if it bubbles. Which netzel is mitami even without keresh v'hertiach? Which netzel is not mitami even with keresh v'hertiach, as we're going to see the criterion in the Gemara. Then the Gemara has a question, not regarding our Mishnah per se of taglachas, but in general, is there yesh netzel behema? Do we say tumas mes regarding that of a behema? Nitzuk is the halachic concept regarding that when we're pouring something, do we say that the item on the top is connected to the thing on the bottom? And we'll see that depending on what the item is, if it's going to be considered as connecting or not. Which we have a machlekes regarding nitzuk for mikpeh shel grisen, which is regarding a porridge type of, it's like a thick type of a dish. Would we say that maybe then it would be considered as connected or not? The question of, which relates to yesh nitzik la'oichlin, do we say that everyone would agree that there's a connection regarding food items? We have machlekes regarding shirekev, what's considered the halacha of when we have tarvid, when we have things that are decomposing, what is that considered regarding the halachas of tumah? Also, food loses its tumah when it's nifsal me'achila. If it's not right l'achila, it doesn't have the halacha of tumah. Now, but there's a machlekes the Gemara brings. Some say it depends. When you have a tumah chamura, which like tumas nevela, that ad leger, then it's like the pasuk says that you give it to the ger, meaning if it's fit for a ger, for adam, then it has the tumah. But if it's nifsal me'achilas adam, it's already not going to have the tumah chamura. Tumah kala, like that of tumas eichlin, that's going to be ad lekelev, meaning what's called if it's royal achilas kelev or not. If a dog even can't eat it, which obviously a dog could eat something that's less raw than the human, so it would be dependent if it's chamur or kala. Others say no, tumah chamura ad lekelev, that even the severe level of tumah is going to have its tumah all the way up until royal achilas kelev. So there's a machlekes regarding tumah chamura, if that's leger or lekelev. So we begin the current daf nun, 10 lines down at the top of the Yomid. The previous Mishnah had said, Al-Ilo tumas an-nazir megalech. So it said al-ames, from mes that was whole, kazayis min ames, which we explained the previous daf. Why would you have to say both mes and kazayis min ames, that we had a few pshatim. And then, the next case of the Mishnah is, val kazayis netzel. For an olive size, that's our Mishnah, our Gemara quotes the words of the Mishnah, kazayis mes, an olive size piece of a dead person, val kazayis netzel, and the kazayis of netzel. Says the Gemara, which Taisa says that's a brisa, actually, turn abundant Taisa says, Ve'ezeu netzel, what is netzel? So says the brisa, it's basar hames shekarash. If you have flesh from a dead person that melted, that dissolved, and then it congealed. And so to umayhil, which is the juice that oozes out from a dead person, shehertiach, which was heated up on the fire, and it bubbles, that's netzel, and the kazayis, an olive size of that, is going to be tami ba'oihel. That says the Bryce says what netzel is. So the Gemara says, wait a second, hey chedami, what is the case talking about that we're saying that this is going to be netzel? In other words, as the Gemara explains, if let's say you don't know if this is from the dead person, in other words, we don't know if this juice that's oozed out is from the flesh of the dead person that melted, or is it from his mucus, from his saliva, which is not considered, I mean, there's a liquid here. We don't know what the liquid is. Is it from his saliva, let's say, that would be tahar? If you say we don't know if it's from him, so kikarash mahava. How does it help that it congeals? How could you go ahead now and say, okay, you Nazir, which, that's the irony, a Nazir is forbidden to do teglach. It's one of the 3 prohibitions to cut up his hair. When it becomes tamei, says, you have to go cut your hair and start over again. But misafik, how could you go ahead and make him cut up his hair? You don't know if it was tamei from the mayil or not. It might have been for kicha v'niyah. Ella, so what are you going to say? No, the yadina dididehu. No, we know that this is from the dead person. So then, afagav glei karash. So says the Gemara, then even if it didn't congeal, then also he should have to cut up his hair and start over. Why do you need it to congeal? Since you know it's from the basar ames. So in other words, the Gemara is trying to understand what is this halachic requirement of karash. So Amar Yommi, he says, I'll tell you. We're talking about bestam. In other words, we know that this juice is coming from the dead person, but we don't know if this juice is coming from his flesh or from his phlegm. So the Gemara explains. Ikarash v'kajils, then moyhelhu. Then we know it's coming from the flesh of the dead person that's oozing out. But if loy karash, if it doesn't kajil, and some Rishonim take out like Taisa's the word dilma, kichlei v'neyahu, then it's from his phlegm and from his saliva. And says Taisa, same thing you could explain regarding the other case of hirtiach, when you bubble it up, that we don't know what it's from. If you heat it up and it bubbles, then it's for sure moil that's coming from the dead person, that's netzel. If it doesn't bubble, then it must be spit, which doesn't bubble. And that is the test of karash v'hirtiach. If it's from the flesh, it's going to be karash, and there's going to be hirtiach, and if it's not, then it's not going to. Okay. Now it says the Gemara the following question. Says, yesh netzel lebehema. If you have an olive-sized piece from a dead animal that decomposes by itself, and it melts, it dissolves, is it going to be metame b'magu b'masa, like a nevela is? Or there is no halacha of netzla for behema? Because the text explains, the question is not regarding the halacha of our Mishnah, of the Nazir having to cut a b'seh and start over again, because that's only b'tumas mes. Question is, in general, do we say that there's a halacha of netzel by also a behema? What's the question? So the Gemara says, do we say gemiri netzel da'asmi adam? When do we have this halachic tradition of netzel that has the same halacha as the tuma of the mess? That's when it comes from a person. When it comes from an animal, no. Or maybe it doesn't make a difference at all. So the Gemara qualifies the question and explains that this question would only be relevant according to one of two opinions, as the Gemara explains. We understand it makes sense according to the one that says, as we said in the introduction, Tumah chamura, a severe tumah, let's say that of tumah of nevelas, which a nevela, dead animal, contaminates a person with maga, with touching, or maso carrying. That's a severe tumah of nevela. There's a mandama that holds ad leger, until it's unable to be eaten by a ger, because the pasuk says, when you have your nevela, what do you do with it? The Jewish person cannot eat it. The pasuk says, leger shebeshirecha titnen v'chala. Give it to the ger toishav, who eats nevelas, and he'll eat it. Oh, that means if it's rov feger, it's called nevela to contaminate with magamasa. Oh, wait a second. Over here, it's not fit not to be metame. You can't even ask the question if there's netzel or not. Because even if you would say there's netzel for behema, here anyways it would be tar, because what is netzel? Netzel is this juice that's oozing out when it's been sitting over there and decomposing. Anyway, a ger wouldn't eat it. No human would eat it anyway. So therefore, the Gemara doesn't get a chance to finish the thought. It just says, finishes up, like Taisa says, the other half of the statement. This man da'ama holds that tumah chamura is up until a ger could eat it, and the tumah kala, which is meaning other food items, not a nevela, meaning a tumas eichlin, which the halacha is, it only is metame a share of a kabeya for other food items and beverages, that tumas eichlin is ad lekelev, meaning until it's invalid from a dog eating it, which Taisa says this end of the statement has nothing to do with our sugya. It's just because we said the first half, we're saying the second half. But be that as it may, shaper, like we said, according to that mandamar, there's nothing to talk about. Even if hypothetically you would say yesh netzel lebehema wouldn't mean anything anyways, because netzel is already in a row lachilas adam, lachilas ger, and the tumah chamura of nevela wouldn't be relevant anyway. So that wouldn't be a question. But the question would be relevant according to the one that holds tumah chamura, a severe level of tumah. Even over there, it's ad lekelev. It still can be considered halacha of tumas nevela, even ad lekelev. Oh, Michael Member, what are you going to say over there? In other words, what Michael Member means, Taisa says, according to him, you could ask the question, would the netzel of behema be considered like the bus of nevela and contaminate a person with magamasa because it's still raw lechilas kelev? Or maybe no. Maybe the halacha was not said by netzel of behema to be considered as basar. Even though it's raw lekelev, it would still be considered like dirt, like dust, and it would not be metame.
What about nevela that just decomposed and is not roy lechilas ger? Is it losing its status of
Yeah. It wouldn't be nevela anymore.
So it's not the Indian from netzel. netzel. It's
Right,
very simple if
right.
it's not royal.
We're just saying that according to that man, the Amma, netzel anyways would be a moot point. But according to one that holds ad lechilas kelev, it would be relevant to ask the question. So the Gemara says, Tosh matbinga raya from a Mishnah, Mesechtes Daf Kuf Chaf, that talks about nevela of an oif tahar, of a kosher bird, a nevela. So the Mishnah describes the following case. Hamchohu, if a guy melted the fats of a nevela of a kosher bird, which is really the equivalent of like a nevela of a behemoth. And if you did a ba'ur in the fire, so tameh, it's going to contaminate. Why? The reason why is because it's not invalid from achilas kelev, or maybe it should say even achilas adam, the Rasha says, but it's normal to go ahead and melt fat on the fire, schmaltz. You melt it on the fire. So it's still going to be tummy, it's still going to contaminate. But if you left it out in the sun, we all know what happens to food that you leave it out in the sun, tahar, it's going to be tar, because when you melt it in the sun, it putrefies from the heat of the sun, and it's not ro lachilas adam anymore, and therefore it's going to be tahar. That's what the Brisa says. It says the Gemara, if you would think to say that there is netzel for a behema, ad lekelev, up until it's not edible for a dog, and the same thing would be for nevela of oif tahar, which is what the case of the Brisa is talking about. Wait a second, afil b'chamanami. Then even if it was heated up in the sun, should also be tummy because it's still ro lachilas kelev. Oh, says the Gemara, obviously that there's no netzel for a behema or an oif tar. And therefore it's going to be tar. Because in contrast, says Taisus, on the fire, that since you did it biyadayim, since you did it on the fire, you're cooking it, it's better than netzel, because netzel is like rotting, it's deteriorating by itself. When you do something on the fire, it's very different than when it gets heated up by the sun. But one thing is, you see, from the case of him of bechama that's mitar, well, it's still raw lachilas kelev. So according to that, why would you say that it wouldn't have the tumah of netzel? Obviously, there's no netzel. Says the Gemara, no, not a raya, because emas mamchile, when does it melt? Is basar dasruach bachama, after it putrefies in the sun, then it melts. Oh, so kiven the asrach, since already spoiled from the sun, it's really spoiled that the havale offer, there would be like dirt, like dust, that as Taisa says, that it's not even ro lekelev. So therefore it's not comparable to the case of netzel of behema, which would melted, not in the sun, which is still fit for ro lachilas kelev, and therefore our question is still relevant. You cannot bring me a raya from this case of the oif tahar that the Brisa is telling me that, himcho bechama, that then it's going to be tahar. So what do you mean? So why is it different than the case of netzel? They're asking you, it would still be ro lachilas kelev, and it should still be tameh. It's not true, says the Gemara, because when something gets left in the sun, it first spoils. That is not even ro lachilas kelev, and then it melts. So okay, that's why everyone would agree it's going to be tar. Versus I can still ask the question: would you say netzel behema or not? So the Gemara says, okay, Tanan. The Gemara says a related Mishnah in the 5th parak of Mesechtes Machshirim. Mishnah says, Kol hanitzik, everything that if you pour it, let's say beverage that's tahar, into a beverage that's tameh, from top to bottom, you're pouring downwards. So all things that are poured are tahar, meaning the tahar beverage does not become tameh because the nitzik, the flow, is not a chibur, it's not connected, not for tumah, not for tahara. It's not considered as a one thing. So even though you look, if you would connect the flow, it would be connected, the bottom liquid, which is tameh, to the top one, that's tahar. We don't say the upper liquid is tameh. Chutz, midvash hazifim, except for the honey zifim. What's zifim honey? So in the last parak of Saita, Daf Mechesem Beis, Rabbi Yechon explains zifim is from the word of ziyuf, a forgery. It's something that they forge because since this honey is very thick, they put in water and it's not recognizable. So it's a very thick honey essentially. Shem Malaka says because of its name, of its place, which is Sefer Yeshua says Zif, Telem, Balois, different places, which Zif is a place. Be that as it may, it's a very thick honey. And Vatzapiches, like we have the pasuk in the Torah regarding the man, Ketzapiches bidvash. In other words, that you take the honey out from the beehive together with the honeycomb. And the Aruch explains that it's a dough that's fried with honey. But be that as it may, regarding these cases, we said that the flow is going to be tummy. Why? Since these items are very thick, it's considered like a food item. So it's as if the upper and the lower are really mixed together because it's so thick. It's like it's one cheftza, and therefore the nitzik over there, the flow would be a chibur. That's the Tana Kama. As we continue to Beis, Bishamayim, they say another case that they disagree with the Tana Kama. Afa mikvah shel grisen, also a porridge of like grisen, which was grinded in a mill to split the beans into two, or vishal pul, which is when they're whole, the beans, and you make a cooked dish out of it. That's also considered like a food item. It's very thick. Beans, very slimy, and you see beans when you cook something, it's like a porridge, like it becomes very thick. And there it's going to be like it's connected. Because when you're pouring the dish, this porridge, and you stop pouring, what happens is that pillar that you were pouring and you pull back, it actually comes back into the cup that you were pouring from the bowl that you're pouring from, because it's very thick. Now, so there's what's called riri, which are these like pieces that fly back in, and it connects the food items to be considered as one. So therefore, Beis Shammai says even there also it's going to be considered as that nitzug is going to be chibur. Now, related to this machlokes, says the Gemara, Boy Ram Bachama, says yesh nitzug la'oichlin. Do we say that there's a flow for food items? For example, let's say this is related to our previous discussion of melting the fats, which we spoke about the oif tahar that we had that there was an avela and you were melting the fats. So when you melt the fats and you pour it into a food item that's tameh, which, as we're going to explain, that this question is according to Rabbanan. We just had two opinions. We had the Rabbanan and Beis Shammai. So according to the Rabbanan, do we say that food items have nitzuk? Or maybe that you say no, that food items, thick foods do not have this halacha of a flow that's connecting. So what's the question? The Gemara explains. Miyamrina, do we say, as some Girsois add on the words that honey, these, time amai, what's the reason? In other words, by the cases that the Rabbanan spoke about, that we say that the flow is a connection. By the dvash hazifim, the thick honey, and the tzapiches, the honey from the honeycomb. The Chum said it's connected. Why did they say those are connected? From the isbu riri, because there has riri. In other words, that they when you stop pouring, it falls back into the bowl that you were pouring from. Now, although they disagree on the case of the porridge of the beans, that when you pull back, it also comes back. No, that's not considered according to the Kama, right? Like riri, it's not as thick as the honey. Whereas Beis Shammai hold that no, even though it's not so much riri, it's still considered to connect the upper to the lower. Okay, so but al kapam, the reason why the Chacham say that by the devash it's going to be considered as nitzuk chibur because it's riri. Now the honey food items less buridi, they don't have that this fact of pulling back and coming back in. So it wouldn't be appropriate to say that it has the halacha of nitzuk of chibur. Maybe no. The reason the Tana Kama maybe is mishum the smichin who. Maybe the reason why they hold of the honey is because it's thick. Oh, v'hoch over here, but other food items also hasmichin. It's thick. So therefore, that's the question we're asking according to Rabbanan / Tana Kama, that why do they say the case by the honey if it's that it's because it's riri, so food items don't have riri. It doesn't fall back in. If it's because it's smichim, because it's thick, well, food items are thick. Because as Tais explains, the question is not according to Beis Shammai. Because what are the words of Beis Shammai in that Mishnah say? Beis Shammai say, Neishein soldin lacharehan, because it falls back in. So according to Beis Shammai, it's obvious because of riri. So it wouldn't be relevant to ask the question according to Beis Shammai. According to Beis Shammai, obviously, food items would not be considered in the halach of nitzuk chibur. The whole question according to Rabbanan, what is their criterion? Why do they say if the honey is it because of riri, or is it because of smichi, because it's thick? So Amar Rabba says, okay, let's bring a raya, Toshima. We learned in the Braisa, Chelev Hameis Shu Shalim, which Tais says doesn't really mean Shalim. There's no Shalim of Chelev. It's not like a whole entity. But if you have the fats of a dead, which is a full kazayas, which that's the shiur of Tumah, Then v'hitichu, which is obvious that Tosfos Girsa was v'chitichu, which means to cut. But Tosfos says the hitichu is like chitichu, but basically it's like our Gemara. Like they melted it on the fire. So the halacha is tamei. That chaylev of kazayis is going to be tamei like it originally was. Meaning, originally it was a full kazayis. You still have a full kazayis together, as we're going to shortly explain. Or because of nitzuk is chibur, the flow is like connected. So therefore, even if you melted, it's not possible that it's not going to be connected but through the nitzuk, or because it really never separated one from the other, as we're going to explain in the Gemara's answer. So, al kapanim, this chaylev, even if you melted it, it's still going to be tamei like a shiur of a kazayis, but hoya mefurid, or Tosfos Girsa mefurur, which are similar, but if it was crumbled, the chaylev of the mess, that you never had originally a full olive. So there, even if the other way around, v'hiticha, you melt it in the fire, so actually what happens when you melt something, it really goes both ways. If you have a salad and you melt, in a way, it's like separating. On the other hand, if you have crumbs and you melt it, in a way, it becomes connected because now it's all one liquid. So even if you melt it, it's going to be tahar, as the Tosefta there in the Halas concludes in the fourth parak, because why not? Why isn't it going to be metamin? Now it's a shiur kazayis together, all those melted, all those separate pieces of, let's say you had grated the chaylev that was a solid, and now you melted, it's one entity of a kazayis. So the Brisa there explains, because what's called chibur adam ein a chibur, what's connected by a human being will not have the halacha of considered as one entity. And since before it was melted, it was not a kazayis connected together, and it was not going to be metami, someone who touched only some of it, or even if someone touched all of it, according to one who holds that you don't have what's called negeya v'chezeh v'negeya, if you touch it and then you touch again, as if you touched it all at one time. So therefore, even when you melt it, it's not going to be considered as a full zayis, because that connection happened through a human being. Now, I says, Tosfos, what do you mean? Don't we have the halacha of revius dam that's above mishnei zeisim that we said in the previous mishnah is metame? According to the one who holds what's called yesh eim lemikah, that we're going to translate a kol nafshes meis, which says that the plural in the singular, that even though it's one entity of revius, but if it comes from two mesim, it's going to combine. So too, when you have two half zeisim from two mesim, the Mishnah in Alis in the Tosefta, the Brisa says it's going to be tamei. Well, I thought you're saying that it can't combine from two different entities. Says Tosfos, no, that's by tumas oil, because tumas oil is fit to be with two halves together. But by touching from two halves, that's not going to be metame. We say in the third parak of Ahala is, if someone touches two half an olive size of an avail, it's going to be tamei. So Tosfos there is talking about that you have a little bit of flesh that's connecting the two of them, as the Gemara answers in Chulun Daf Kaf Chav Dalet. So that is considered one entity, even though it's two different ones, because it's still connected with something, a strip of flesh. But then it says, okay, so why don't you resolve from over here that the question which is asked in Shas, Chiburi Adam, if it's Chibur or not, l'chari you should answer and prove that it's not. So it says, no. That's specifically by Tumas Mess. When the Tumas is coming from the mess itself, to combine it to Kazais, to Mimtami, other things, maybe that was the Kabbalah, that it cannot be through a person, like we're saying when you melt it to make it into one entity of Israel. But to combine food items, to be Makabal Tumah, the Shir B'Kabeya, in general, there maybe Chibur Adam would be a Chibur, just like all Eichlon are mitzvah from the Kabeya, so that wouldn't be a Raya for the generic question that's asked in Shas, if Chibur Adam is Chibur or not. Okay, but Akapanim, this Brisa, says Rava, could answer our question, according to the Chacham, if there's Nitzik L'Eichlon or not. Why? Because says the Gemara, V'isol Kadaitach. Now, if you would think to say, remember, there's a question we're asking. We want to prove from the Brisa one way or the other. Because if you would think to say that Ein Nitzik L'Eichlon, which is the question we're asking, we want to know, is there Nitzik L'Eichlon? Is it not? If you would think to say that there's no Nitzik L'Eichlon, then you would have a difficulty with this Brisa. What would be the difficulty? The case of Shalom B'Tichri, when you have a full kazayis and you melted it, you told me it's going to remain tamei. What do you mean? Nami litar. It should be tahar. Meaning, as Tosfos explains, when you take a kazayis of chaylev and you put on the fire, it's not possible that you shouldn't have a droplet of that now turning into oil that shouldn't separate from where it was connected because of that you were melting it. And obviously, you have to say that the nitzuk is a chibur because it's not possible that droplet shouldn't be connected to the rest of the chayil only through nitzuk. And if it's not considered a chibur, so then that droplet separated and you don't have a kazayis. So obviously you see that by Eichlin, you do say nitzuk, because or else how else would this chaylev remain tameh? To which Amar Reb Zera, he has a very creative answer that he gives. He says, not true. He says, Ano o ma b'rei Ravina targimna, me and ma b'rei Ravina, we translate the case of the Braisa, Hachamai what we're talking about? When you heated up this shuman, Salik Amuda, the Nura, some take out the word the Nura, but like a pillar of fire went up, Lapume Demana, to the mouth of the pot, V'karash, and it congealed over there. The Isakuli Gabe Hadadi, that all of it is together. Meaning, as Taisa explains, when you put the fat on the fire and you boiled it up, so it shot up a kazayas of the chaylev to the opening of the vessel in one shot from the power of the fire, and it congealed, where now you have it all there at one, which Taisa says you have to say that it congealed over there by the opening of the pot, because if it didn't congeal, rather it would fall down to its place, it wouldn't fall down as one, it would fall down like a flow, because the power of the fire does not help to fall as it causes to go up. So when it goes up, it shoots up in one shot, but when it would fall down like it would flow with the power of gravity. So Al Kapan, all the Gemara is saying is, you don't have a raya. Could be that there is no nitzik for Eichlin. If there's no nitzik for Eichlin, the moment you heat it up and it starts melting, it's not connected anymore. It's not true. What happened was when you put on the fire, it shot up a one shtick of kazayas that congealed and it always stayed together. That's what he's answering. So Amalei Ravina Rav Asher is Tashma, let's bring a raya from a Mishnah Machshirin, meaning the Mishnah that we brought previously on the top of the Samid, we had mentioned the machlekes between Tanakam and Beis Shammai. Now the Gemara wants to bring a raya from Beis Shammai to what the opinion of Rabbanu would be. Because the Mishnah said, Beis Shammai, they say, although we generally say nitzuk is not a chibur, flow is not going to be tamid the tar of liquid on the top, but there is exception, said the Tanakama, the honey of zifim and also tapiches, and said Beis Shammai, afa mikvah shel grisim v'shel pul. Also, a porridge of split beans or beans, there the flow is going to be considered connected. Why? Because it falls back in when you pull back from the vessel that you're pouring in. So obviously, that the reason of Shammai is because of riri, that through the rear, through that stickiness, that the pillar would fall back into the vessel that you're pouring from when you stop. Or just like the reasoning of Beis Shammai is because of riri, so then it would be logical, it says Taisus, how the Gemara is understanding right now, that the reason the Tanakama would also be because of riri. It's just that the Tanakama requires more riri tuva. And you can resolve that regarding other food items that don't have riri, so then there's no nitzik. So it seems that would answer the question that according to the Tanakama / Chachamim, you're right, we would say there's no nitzik for Eichlin. Because evidently that they agree to the primary premise of Beis Shammai that it's because of riri, because it's solas lacharen. They hold it needs to be more, like the honey. And they just disagree on the case of the beans. But in the case of Eichlin Simon, they would agree that there would not be any nitzik. Which the Gemara says, no, midi irya, it's not a proof. Hasam over there by the Devash of Zifman and Tzapiches, the reason why Korn Rabban is considered as a chibur, that's because, no, I could tell you Mishum Desmichin, because it's thick, not because of riri. And therefore that would include even food items too. And that's actually what they're disagreeing on Beis Shammai. Because Hacha Mishum Riri. Because Beis Shammai hold that even if it's not thick, it's considered as connected, because there's riri. For example, let's say by the porridge of the beans. Whereas according to the Kama, riri is loymal v'loymayrid, and therefore again there's no raya. Could be the Chacham would hold that food items you would have nitzah because it's taller in smichi and it's not tali in riri. Now we said in the Mishnah, the next case of the items from a mess that contaminates and that's going to require the nazir to be megalech was val moli tarid rekev, on a spoonful of the decomposed flesh of the dead person. Says the Gemara, shiur, how much is this spoonful of rekev, of the dust of a dead person, to be metame? So Chizkiyah says it's maloi pieces hayad. He says that it's from the beginning of where the fingers start coming out of the palm until the arm. So basically it's just the palm, where the fingers start coming out, up until where the fingers start coming out, until the wrist, that's the palm of the hand. That's how much dust of the dead person would be metame. Rabbi Yochanan he says molei chafna. No, he says a handful. So not just the palm, the whole hand, including the fingers. So the Gemara wonders none. We learned in the Mishnah, or it's really a brisa that says moloi tavid rekab shamar this, that they said that a spoonful of dust of the dead person is mimitame ba'oil yeshnon meikir etzboi salamala divrei Meir. So Meir says that's from where the fingers start coming out of the hand until the fingertips. That's how much dust is required. They say malay chafnam. They say a handful. It says the Gemara, Rabbi Shloimy who he just said a moment ago that it's chafnav, a handful. Who done with Rabbanan? So he's like Rabbanan. It's machlekes tanaim. He's like that Tana. El Chizkiah Kaman, but Chizkiah who said the palm. Who's he like? Loikre Meir, because Meir said halacha of the fingers, and Rabbanan who says it's the handful. Somebody said no, it's not a difficulty because they said there's two explanations which Chizkiah does concur with Meir. Either says the Gemara, Maloi Pisas Hayad, this shear of the palm, Umaloi Kishre Tzbais Malik, we have the picture over here, which are the from the where the fingers start coming out from the palm all the way to the tip, Chad Shiuruhu. It's one measurement, meaning the amount that you could contain in your fingers is the amount that you contain in your palm of your hand. That's one approach that's the same shear, so it's exactly like a Meir. Or the second shot, Amalei Rav Shimon bar Adil Rav Papa says, who said what you were reading when you were saying from where the fingers start coming out and above meant l'roish to the fingertips that you're asking from, that it's a different pshat than Chizkiah. Maybe it was talking about where the fingers come out, which is where it connects to the hand, which is where the palm is, and lamala that was said was regarding closer to the body, to the wrist. The havalei moli pisas hayad, which is exactly the measurement of Chizkiah, which is the palm of the hand. So the next word tekui, both the Vilna Gaon and Taisus take it out because there's no tekui. It's not like a tekui. It's just saying that could be a second shot for exactly what he's saying. It doesn't mean lamala doesn't mean this way. Lamala can mean this way, and if it's exactly the shear of the piece of yad, which is like Chizkiah. Thank you to any time for hosting us.